It's funny how the most life-shattering moments often come wrapped in the most innocuous packages. If you'd asked me a year ago about the biggest problem in my life, I would have said the paint peeling off our front door or the broken dishwasher that kept getting worse. There's a certain comfort in trivial issues. They make you think your life is steady, that everything's in its place. But then, one evening, as I sat in our living room, holding a cup of coffee like any other night, I realized that the ground beneath me had shifted. Not with a dramatic collapse, but like the slow, insidious cracking of a foundation you never even knew was fragile. That's when I knew my world had been turned upside down, and I hadn't even noticed the signs. It started with a message. A strange one, really, just a short text from Amelia, my wife. I'd been expecting her to come home around 6 p.m., as usual, but this message, which came in at 4:30, didn't sound like her at all. "Hey, I'm staying at the cabin for a couple of days. Don't worry. It's important. Don't ask." I stared at it for what felt like an eternity, my fingers frozen over the screen. There was no greeting, no usual sign-off, no emojis. It was terse. Too much so. I typed back, asking if everything was okay, but the message didn't go through. No reply. Now, I've always known my wife to be independent. She valued her space, as did I. We had our routines, and honestly, they suited us both. But this was different. The cabin wasn't supposed to be an escape. It was our place for weekend getaways, a shared retreat in the woods, a place we both loved, where we'd spent countless weekends together, unwinding from the city's madness. I tried calling her, but the call went straight to voicemail. So, naturally, my mind began to race. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe she just needed some time alone. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized something didn't sit right. If there was a problem, why wouldn't she tell me? Why would she leave without warning, without an explanation? I grabbed my keys and drove up to the cabin, determined to get some answers. The drive was long, taking me through winding roads that cut through dense trees and barren fields, the kind of scenery that always made you feel like you were entering another world. I arrived well after dark, around 9:30 p.m., the cabin's dim lights flickering in the distance. It felt oddly quiet, too quiet. I parked the car and stood there for a moment, staring up at the place that had once felt like home. It wasn't the first time I'd been there without Amelia, but tonight it felt wrong. The air was colder than usual, and the trees around the cabin seemed to loom in a way I hadn't noticed before. I shrugged it off as an overactive imagination, but my gut was telling me something was off. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing. A chill ran through me. I tried the door. It was unlocked. I stepped inside cautiously, the creak of the floorboards echoing in the silence. The interior was dark, but there was a faint glow from the living room, so I moved toward it, unsure of what to expect. And that's when I saw it. The table, the mess of papers scattered across the surface. I walked over, hoping to find something to explain Amelia's sudden departure. But as I leaned in to look closer, my heart skipped a beat. The papers weren't just random documents. There was something specific about them. A few were personal letters, but most were bills and statements. I picked up the top sheet, a utility bill from the local electric company. But what made my stomach churn wasn't the bill itself. It was the name on it. It wasn't mine. Amelia's name was there, but it wasn't her name alone. Beside it was another name, one I didn't recognize. I ran my fingers over the paper, trying to make sense of it. My mind was racing, wondering who this person was. Was it a mistake? Could it be a mistake? I glanced around the room, looking for something to explain this, but all I found was an unsettling quiet. I walked to the kitchen, hoping to find Amelia, hoping she was just in the bathroom or upstairs, hiding away from something. But the cabin was empty. I went to the bedroom next. The sheets were still messy from when we'd last stayed there together, just a few days ago. But what stopped me in my tracks was the dresser. The top drawer was slightly open, and when I pulled it out, my heart sank. Amelia's things weren't there. Her clothes, her jewelry, her personal items, none of them were in sight. They were gone. I stood there, stunned, as the weight of the situation settled over me. She'd left. Not for a few days. She had left for good. And whoever this person was, the name on that bill, they were involved. But how? Why? I turned and walked out of the room, trying to make sense of the chaos in my head. My first instinct was to call Amelia again, to demand an explanation. But my phone buzzed in my pocket, cutting me off. It was a message from her. Just one line. "I'm sorry, Cal. I never meant for you to find out like this." I read it over and over again, the words repeating in my mind. I stood there, trying to process what had just happened. There were no details, no answers. Just that. And the sinking realization that the life I had built, my marriage, my home, everything I thought I knew, had crumbled before my eyes. I felt a wave of panic rise in my chest. What had I missed? Why didn't I see the signs? Then, before I could even think about my next move, I heard something. A faint sound from outside. Footsteps. I froze. The sound of the footsteps outside jolted me from my thoughts. My heart thudded loudly in my chest as I spun toward the window, desperate to see who it was. I couldn't make out much through the dim light, but I saw a shadow move past the cabin, heading toward the woods. My immediate instinct was to run out and confront whoever it was, but something held me back. I was frozen in place, my mind racing with questions that didn't seem to have answers. Could it be Amelia? Had she come back? If so, why wasn't she answering her phone? Why had she left in the first place? The more I thought about it, the more unsettled I became. This wasn't just a simple argument or a brief escape. There was something deeper, something darker lurking beneath the surface of what had just happened. I couldn't just wait around and guess. I needed to figure out what was going on. I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside, my eyes scanning the area as I carefully approached the door. My pulse was still racing. As I made my way out of the cabin, I tried to steady my breath. Every instinct told me to stay inside, to just leave and try to forget about all of this, but my feet moved on their own. There was something in me that wouldn't let this go. Not now. As I ventured further into the woods, I tried to piece together the bits of information I had. The name on the bill, the one I didn't recognize, had to be important. Was it someone she was seeing? Someone she had been hiding from me? My mind was all over the place, running through 1,000 scenarios, none of them good. The footsteps I had heard earlier still echoed in my mind, and I wondered if I'd catch up to whoever had been lurking near the cabin. I walked for what felt like miles, the crunch of leaves beneath my feet the only sound breaking the eerie silence of the forest. The cold air stung my face, but it did little to numb the thoughts swirling in my head. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting someone to appear out of nowhere. Eventually, I stopped near a large rock, catching my breath. I leaned against it, trying to calm my thoughts. It was then that I noticed something strange, the unmistakable sound of a piece of paper rustling in the wind. At first, I thought it was just a passing gust, but when I looked down, I saw something white wedged between two rocks. I crouched down and pulled it out, my hands shaking as I unfolded it. It was a letter. The handwriting was familiar, too familiar. It was Amelia's. My stomach churned as I read through the words, each line sending a new wave of shock through me. It wasn't a letter of goodbye, as I had hoped. It was something much more unsettling. Amelia had written it not to me, but to someone else. And as I continued reading, the realization hit me like a punch to the gut. She was involved with someone else. But it wasn't just that. The letter detailed everything. How she had planned to leave me, how she had secretly sold the cabin behind my back, how she'd been working with someone I didn't know to execute this plan. My name had been deliberately erased from everything. The cabin was no longer ours. It had been turned over to someone else. And Amelia had been planning this for months. I stood there, frozen, the weight of the letter pressing down on me. My mind struggled to comprehend what I was reading. How could she have done this? How could she have been planning this behind my back? I wanted to scream, to throw the letter down and run back to the cabin to confront her. But my legs wouldn't move. The reality of the situation was sinking in, and it was far worse than I could have imagined. I carefully folded the letter and tucked it into my jacket pocket, my hands still trembling. The cold seemed to intensify as I realized how alone I was. Amelia had been living a double life, and I had been none the wiser. How long had this been going on? What else had she kept from me? My heart ached, not just from betrayal, but from the overwhelming sense that I had been blind to everything that had been happening around me. I turned back toward the cabin, my steps slower now, weighed down by the revelation. I could hear the sound of my breath cutting through the cold air, each exhale fogging up in front of me. The cabin felt farther away with each step, and I wondered what I would find when I got there. Would Amelia be there waiting, ready to explain herself? Or had she already left for good? When I reached the cabin, the door was still wide open, just like I had left it. The silence inside was deafening. I stepped inside cautiously, my eyes scanning the room. Everything looked untouched. Nothing seemed out of place. But I knew better now. The changes weren't visible in the furniture or the decorations. The real change was something far deeper, hidden beneath the surface. Amelia had been planning something, and I had no idea what she was capable of. I sat down at the kitchen table, my mind spinning. The letter in my pocket felt like a weight I couldn't carry. The cabin, once a place of comfort and warmth, now felt like a tomb. Every creak of the floorboards sent a jolt of panic through me. I couldn't understand how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. And then, I heard it again, the sound of footsteps outside. But this time, they weren't in the distance. They were close. Too close. I stood up, my pulse quickening. What was going on? Was someone still here? Or had Amelia returned? My thoughts were racing. I moved toward the door and peeked out the window. The figure I saw was one I hadn't expected. It was Richard, Amelia's father. He stood outside in the dark, his face obscured by shadows. My heart dropped. What was he doing here? I stood there for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest as I stared out the window. Richard, Amelia's father. His face was partly hidden by the shadows, but his stance was unmistakable. He was standing there, motionless, like he was waiting for something. Or someone. My mind raced, trying to piece together why he would be here at this hour, especially after everything that had happened. Richard wasn't the type of person to just show up unannounced, not without a reason. His visit could only mean one thing. He knew something. Something about Amelia's disappearance. I stepped back from the window, my thoughts swirling. Should I confront him? Should I wait for him to make the first move? I didn't have much time to think, as I could hear him move closer to the cabin, his footsteps now sharp against the cold ground. He was coming toward the door. I quickly scanned the room for a place to hide, but there was nowhere that would give me cover in time. The idea of just opening the door and confronting him made my skin crawl. But the other option, sitting here in silence, pretending to be unaware, was just as unsettling. My instinct told me to get ready for anything. Whatever was going on here, it was no longer just about Amelia. This had become bigger than her. This was about me, and I had no idea how deep this rabbit hole really went. I took a deep breath and stepped quietly toward the door. It was almost absurd, this sudden sense of being a stranger in my own home. For months, this cabin had been my sanctuary, a retreat from the world. Now it felt like a cage, a place where every shadow could hide a secret. As Richard's footsteps grew louder, I moved toward the back window, where I could peer out unnoticed. He was standing at the edge of the porch now, looking down at the ground as if he was deep in thought. His back was turned to me, but I could still see him clearly. He wasn't wearing his usual calm expression. His jaw was clenched, and his posture was rigid, as if he were preparing for something. I could hear his voice, low and urgent, as he muttered to himself. The words were too quiet to make out, but I caught the occasional phrase, something about a new agreement, taking control, and the worst of all, no way out. What the hell was he talking about? I felt a cold chill run through me as I realized that the situation was far worse than I had imagined. Richard wasn't just here for a friendly visit. He was here for something much darker. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. Without thinking, I grabbed the spare key I had kept hidden near the door and unlocked it quietly. As I opened it just a crack, I could see Richard's silhouette against the porch light. He was pacing now, moving back and forth, his hands tucked into his jacket pockets. He was waiting for something or someone, and it didn't take long before I understood what it was. A car pulled up on the gravel road, its headlights cutting through the darkness. I could see the silhouette of a second person getting out. My blood ran cold. Amelia? No, it couldn't be her. She hadn't responded to any of my messages, not even once. She wouldn't just show up here, not after everything that had happened. Richard stood up straight, his body stiff with anticipation. The second figure moved toward him, and I held my breath, hoping to catch a glimpse of who it was. When the person stepped into the light, I couldn't believe my eyes. It wasn't Amelia. It was a man, a tall figure with a heavy coat, his face obscured by a hood. My heart skipped a beat. Who the hell was this? Richard greeted the man with a stiff nod. "You're late," he said sharply, his voice full of irritation. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced around the area, clearly looking for something. His eyes scanned the porch, the cabin, and then settled back on Richard. I could hear the man's voice now, low and gravelly. I had to make sure no one was following me. You know how it is. People are starting to ask questions. Richard nodded, a tight smile playing on his lips. Of course, but we don't have time for questions. We need to move forward. Amelia's gone, and we have no more time to waste. I felt like I was losing grip on everything. What was happening? Who was this man? And why were they talking about Amelia like she was already gone? Had she left with this stranger? Was this the person she had been hiding from me? And why had Richard said, "No more time to waste"? The urgency in his voice sent a wave of dread over me. I stayed hidden, not daring to move, my body frozen in place. My mind raced through 100 possibilities, none of them good. There was no way Richard would say something like that unless he knew what had happened to Amelia, or unless he was the one who had been orchestrating it all along. The man took a few steps forward, closer to Richard. "You're sure she's gone? For good?" Richard nodded slowly. "She's taken care of. All the paperwork's been sorted. There's no way back now." Paperwork? What was he talking about? My mind felt like it was spinning, my thoughts racing faster than I could keep up with. My eyes flicked back to the window, desperate to make sense of this strange, cryptic conversation. But it wasn't the words that caught my attention. It was the way the man reached into his coat pocket and pulled something out. Something small, folded neatly in his hand. A piece of paper. He handed it to Richard without a word. Richard took it carefully, glancing down at it quickly. Then, he looked up at the man and nodded in approval. "Perfect. It's all in place. Now we just need to wait for the final piece." I was losing my grip. What final piece? What had Amelia been involved in? What had Richard done to her? To us? This wasn't just a simple case of infidelity or a family dispute. This was something far more sinister. And I was starting to realize that I was in over my head. Without thinking, I backed away from the window, my breath coming in short bursts. I had to get out of here. I had to figure out what was really going on before it was too late. But one thing was certain. This wasn't just about Amelia anymore. This was about power, control, and I had no idea how much of it had been taken from me already. I stood there, pressing my back against the wall, trying to make myself as invisible as possible. The conversation outside was almost like a slow-moving train wreck. I wanted to run, to burst out of the cabin and demand answers, but something held me back. The fear of the unknown had gripped me so tightly that I couldn't even move. I listened intently, heart hammering in my chest as Richard and the stranger continued their exchange. The man with the hood, the one I still couldn't place, spoke again, his tone far more relaxed than it had been when he first arrived. "So, you've got everything ready?" he asked, his voice low, but carrying a sense of certainty that sent a shiver through me. "The cabin is under control?" Richard's response came quickly, but there was a brief hesitation before he spoke. "It's taken care of. All the documents are in place. Amelia's already signed everything." Amelia. My chest tightened at the sound of her name. She had signed something? What had she agreed to? Why was she doing this? The words felt like a betrayal, like a hammer pounding against my chest. I had no idea what was happening. The pieces of this puzzle didn't fit, and I was desperate to make sense of it all. The man nodded, his face still mostly hidden in the shadows. "And the money? Is that part of the deal?" Richard let out a short, dry laugh. "Of course. You think I'd do this for nothing?" There was a harsh edge to his voice now, a bitterness that I hadn't heard before. "We're talking about a lot more than just a cabin. This is about setting things up for the future. Once we're in control, we can move everything around, sell what needs to be sold, and make sure nobody stands in our way." The words didn't fully register at first, but when they did, my blood ran cold. In control. What was Richard talking about? Was he trying to take control of my life, my assets, and my future? And Amelia? What had she gotten herself involved in? Was she complicit in this? Or had she been manipulated into it? The questions burned in my mind, but none of them had answers. I didn't know how long I stood there, frozen, listening. Every word felt like a dagger, each one revealing just how much I didn't know. I had thought I understood my wife, thought I knew the woman I had been married to for years. But now, I couldn't even recognize her. The Amelia I had known wouldn't do this. She wouldn't sell us out. But this wasn't just about her. This was about something bigger, something much more dangerous. Finally, the man spoke again, his voice cutting through the tension. "So what's the plan now? What happens next?" Richard paused before answering, his tone more calculated now, almost businesslike. "We wait. Amelia will be the one to make the final decision. She'll handle the paperwork, finalize everything, and then it's done. But we need to make sure there's no interference. No one can know what we're doing, or it all falls apart. The final decision. Amelia was going to make the final decision? What did that even mean? Was she going to be the one to pull the trigger on whatever this plan was? Had she already made up her mind? And what was the price of this final decision? Was this all just about money? Power? Or was there something even more sinister at play? I stepped back from the window, unable to listen any longer. I felt my pulse in my temples, a dull ache that throbbed through my entire body. The walls of the cabin, the place that had once felt so safe, now seemed like a cage closing in on me. It wasn't just the secrets. It was the feeling of being utterly alone, trapped in a situation I didn't understand, with no one to turn to. I moved back to the kitchen, my mind racing. I needed a plan. I needed answers. But most of all, I needed to get ahead of this. I couldn't sit idly by while Amelia and her father conspired behind my back. I wasn't sure what their endgame was, but I knew I had to stop it before it was too late. I glanced at the table where the letter I had found earlier lay folded. I hadn't dared to read it all the way through. I hadn't been ready for it. But now, as I stared at the paper, I realized that it might hold the key to everything. It wasn't just a letter. It was a map of how far Amelia had fallen into this web, of how deep Richard's manipulation had gone. With trembling hands, I picked it up and unfolded it. The words were crisp, cold, and final. Amelia had written it to someone, but not just anyone. It was addressed to a lawyer, a name I didn't recognize, someone who had been involved in the legal side of whatever this plan was. The letter mentioned finalizing the sale of the cabin, a full transfer of ownership, and something about a new life that Amelia and Richard were going to start. A new life. That phrase burned in my mind as I reread the letter. What kind of life were they planning? What had they planned for me? And why hadn't Amelia told me about this? Why hadn't she been honest? The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just about the cabin. This was about everything, our entire life together. Suddenly, I felt sick. I had to find out more. I had to know what was happening, who was behind all of this, and what role I was supposed to play in it. I had a million questions, but only one thing was clear. I couldn't trust Amelia. I couldn't trust Richard. And I couldn't trust anyone involved in this mess. As I stood there, staring at the letter, I realized something else. I wasn't just going to sit around and wait for them to make their move. I had to act. I had to take control back, even if it meant digging up the past, even if it meant facing things I wasn't ready to confront. I had no idea where this path would lead, but one thing was certain. I couldn't turn back now. I could feel the weight of the letter in my hands, its paper stiff and foreign in my grip. The words on it blurred for a moment as my mind raced, struggling to piece everything together. Amelia, the woman I thought I knew inside and out, had betrayed me in ways I couldn't yet comprehend. This wasn't just about a simple affair or a small lie. This was something bigger. This was about control, manipulation, and trust, things I had thought we shared, things I had thought were solid. Now, they were slipping through my fingers, and I didn't know how to stop it. I quickly folded the letter back up and shoved it into my jacket pocket, my hands still trembling. The air in the cabin felt colder, heavier. I couldn't just sit here anymore. I needed answers, and I needed them now. The darkness outside pressed against the windows like it was closing in on me. My mind was racing, calculating, trying to figure out what to do next. I had to confront Amelia. I had to make her explain everything. The plan they were talking about, the deal she had signed, the one that had erased me from everything, wasn't something I could just ignore. If Richard and whoever this man were behind this, then Amelia wasn't just caught in the middle. She was part of it. She had chosen this. And that choice left me feeling hollow, betrayed in ways I couldn't even begin to describe. I grabbed my keys, still not fully sure what I was going to say or do. My mind kept circling back to that moment outside the cabin, where Richard had spoken about moving everything around. What did that mean? Was it just the cabin they were talking about, or was there more? The sale of the property felt like the least of my worries now, but it was still a part of it. There had to be more, hidden accounts, secret deals, things I wasn't seeing yet. I didn't waste any more time. The night had grown darker, and my car headlights pierced through the fog as I drove toward the town where Amelia's family had their main residence. It was a small town, just off the main highway, and it wasn't the sort of place where people disappeared. At least, I didn't think it was. But now, Everything felt strange. Everything felt like a lie. As I drove through the winding roads, my thoughts kept circling back to the man in the hood. I didn't recognize him. There was no telling what he was involved in, but it was clear he wasn't just some random stranger. He was important. Important to Richard, important to whatever scheme they were pulling off. And Amelia, how far had she gone down this path? Was she a willing participant, or had she been manipulated? Either way, I didn't know her anymore. I reached her family's house around midnight. The lights were off in most of the windows, but there was a faint light shining in the upstairs room. I parked down the road, far enough away that I wouldn't be noticed. I didn't want to barge in. I needed to think, to make sure I approached this the right way. But everything inside me screamed to just storm up to that door and demand the truth. I walked down the narrow path that led up to the house. The quiet of the night felt suffocating. I could hear the soft rustle of leaves in the trees, the occasional croak of a frog from the nearby creek, but other than that, everything was eerily still. The house loomed ahead, its dark windows staring at me like silent eyes, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. As I stood on the porch, I hesitated. Should I knock? Should I just barge in? My hands were sweaty, and my chest felt tight with anticipation. I couldn't figure out how to approach this. But before I could make up my mind, the door creaked open. It was Amelia. She stood there in the doorway, her expression unreadable. She didn't say anything at first, just stared at me like she was weighing whether to let me in or send me away. Her hair was messier than usual, her eyes darker. The calm, collected woman I had married was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. "Cal," she said finally, her voice almost too calm. "What are you doing here?" I didn't know where to start. I could feel the anger rising in me, bubbling up from deep inside. But I swallowed it, trying to keep my voice steady. "I came for answers, Amelia. I need to know what the hell is going on. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you trust me?" Her eyes flickered, and for a moment, I thought I saw something like guilt pass through them. But then, she quickly masked it with her usual calm demeanor. "I didn't think you'd understand, Cal. This wasn't something I could explain in a text or over the phone. She stopped herself, taking a deep breath. "I didn't want to hurt you." I could feel my chest tightening. "Hurt me?" I repeated, the words barely audible as I struggled to hold it together. "You think this is about hurt? Amelia, you've been lying to me. You've been hiding things from me, things I didn't even know were happening. The cabin, the sale, the documents, I found everything. Don't act like you didn't have a choice in this." Her face faltered for just a split second, but it was enough to show me the cracks in her mask. "It's complicated, Cal," she said, her voice quieter now. "I didn't want to involve you. I thought I could handle it alone. But now, I don't know what's going to happen. It's too late." I took a step closer, unable to hold back the frustration that was building inside me. "Too late? Too late for what, Amelia? What's really going on? What did you sign? What deal did you make with your father and that man?" For the first time, her expression shifted from calm to something more uncertain. "It's not just about the cabin, Cal. There's more at stake than you realize. I did what I had to do to protect us. I thought I was doing the right thing. But now, everything is falling apart. I don't know if I can fix it." I felt my breath catch in my throat. This wasn't just about real estate, about the cabin anymore. This was about something bigger, something she was still too scared to tell me. But her admission, that one fragile moment of vulnerability, told me everything I needed to know. Amelia was in deeper than I had ever imagined, and I had to dig even further to find out the truth. I grabbed her arm, my grip firm but not tight. "Then tell me what's going on, Amelia. Tell me what you've gotten us both into. I need to know." She pulled back slightly, her face tense with fear. "I can't, Cal. Not yet." And then, the lights in the house flickered, and for a moment, we both froze. A noise from inside. A sound that didn't belong. Someone was in the house, watching us, waiting. I felt the air shift, and suddenly, I was no longer alone in the dark. The moment the lights flickered, everything around me seemed to freeze. The chill in the air grew thicker, almost suffocating, as if the atmosphere itself was holding its breath. My eyes locked onto Amelia's, and I could see a flicker of fear there, the kind that I hadn't seen in years. This wasn't just a little misunderstanding anymore. Whatever was going on was far deeper than I'd ever imagined. The noise inside the house, footsteps, soft but deliberate, reached us again. Someone was in there, and they weren't hiding it anymore. My heart raced in my chest, every instinct telling me to get inside, to figure out what was happening, but Amelia's grip tightened on the doorframe, and she stepped slightly in front of me. "Amelia, what the hell is going on? Who's in there?" I demanded, my voice sharp, almost desperate. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she glanced over her shoulder toward the darkened hallway, as if calculating whether she should tell me the truth or keep it hidden. The hesitation was too much for me to bear. I pushed past her, my feet carrying me toward the door without waiting for permission. I had to know. I had to know what had been going on behind my back. As soon as I stepped into the foyer, the tension in the air hit me like a physical wall. It wasn't just the atmosphere of the house. It was the feeling that something had been waiting for me, something I wasn't supposed to find. The door closed behind me with a soft click, but I didn't turn around to look. My eyes darted to the shadows, trying to catch any movement. "Amelia," I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Who's here? What is all of this?" She followed me into the house, but she didn't speak. Instead, she led me down the narrow hallway toward the kitchen, her eyes flicking nervously toward the corner of the room. I could hear the faint murmur of voices, too muffled to make out, but it was clear they were coming from the living room. I could feel my pulse quicken as I moved closer. There was no turning back now. When we rounded the corner into the living room, the sight that met my eyes made my blood run cold. Sitting on the couch, almost casually, was the man I had seen earlier, the one who had been with Richard at the cabin. The man in the hood. But now, the hood was gone, and I could see his face clearly. Dark hair, sharp features, but his eyes were calculating, cold. A man used to power, used to control. He wasn't alone. Beside him, seated with an air of forced calm, was a woman I didn't recognize. She was older, mid-40s maybe, with a sharp, no-nonsense demeanor. Her gaze was cold and assessing as she looked me up and down, clearly sizing me up, as though she were trying to figure out what use I could possibly be to her. Amelia stepped past me and stood in front of the man, her posture stiff, her face pale. "Cal," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. This is Michael. And this," she gestured to the woman, "is Jennifer. They've been helping us with everything." My mind reeled, struggling to keep up with the unraveling truth. Helping us? These people were part of the plan? I had no idea what was happening, but the sheer weight of their presence, of the conspiracy they were part of, was crushing. Michael didn't stand up, didn't make any effort to greet me. Instead, he looked at me with an air of quiet amusement, as though I was the last person he had expected to show up. His smile was thin, almost mocking. "So, you're the husband," he said, his voice smooth, like it was a formality to him. "I've heard a lot about you. Enough to make decisions behind my back." I shot back, my anger rising. "What's all of this? Why are you here, and what the hell is my wife involved in?" Amelia flinched at the question, but it was Jennifer who answered. She stood up then, her presence commanding attention. She didn't smile. "Your wife is involved in something much bigger than you think, Cal," she said, her voice cold and confident. "This isn't just about the cabin. It's about power, and it's about control. You've been a distraction, an obstacle in a plan that's been years in the making." I took a step back, my mind scrambling to make sense of her words. "Power? Control?" I repeated, the words almost foreign in my mouth. "What are you talking about?" Michael finally leaned forward on the couch, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You're the last piece of the puzzle, Cal. Amelia tried to protect you, but in the end, there was no choice but to bring you in." "Bring me in." My voice cracked. "What the hell does that mean?" Amelia closed her eyes briefly, like she was bracing for something. Then she spoke, her voice quiet, almost ashamed. "They're right. Cal, I never wanted you to be part of this. But everything is falling apart. The deal we made, it's too far gone now. I've tried to hold on to everything, but it's slipping through my fingers. You were never supposed to know." "Amelia," I whispered, my heart sinking. "What deal? What the hell are you talking about?" She looked away, unable to meet my eyes, and in that moment, I knew. I had been blind to the signs. I had thought we were building a life together, that we were partners in every sense of the word. But everything had been a lie. A carefully constructed facade that hid the truth of what was really going on behind the scenes. The cabin was just the beginning. Jennifer spoke again, her tone cutting through the silence. "It's about moving assets, acquiring influence, and ensuring the right people stay in control. We've been working on this for a long time, Cal. It was never just about real estate. It's about what comes after. And Amelia. Amelia was always going to be the key. I couldn't breathe. Every word felt like a blade, cutting through the fabric of everything I had known. My wife, the woman I loved, had been part of this world, a world I had never seen, a world that had been hidden from me. Amelia, I said, my voice hoarse, tell me you didn't do this. Tell me you didn't sell us out for money, for power. She finally looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mix of regret and something darker, fear, perhaps. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, Michael interrupted. It's done, Cal, he said, standing up from the couch. This is bigger than you, bigger than your marriage. You need to understand that. And now that you're here, we have a decision to make. Whether you stay and play your part, or whether you walk away, pretending you never saw any of this. The finality in his words hit me harder than anything else. There was no going back. The life I thought I had was slipping away, piece by piece, and I was caught in the middle of it all. No more lies. No more half-truths. This was the end of something, but I had no idea what it was the beginning of. And suddenly, I realized I wasn't just fighting for answers anymore. I was fighting for my life. I could feel the weight of Michael's words pressing down on me, suffocating me. The room had grown colder, the shadows longer, as though the walls themselves were closing in. Every word he spoke had a finality to it, as though I was no longer in control of my own fate. And Amelia, my wife, the woman I had trusted for years, stood silently beside them, her eyes not meeting mine. She was part of this. She had made her choice. I took a step back, my pulse hammering in my ears. You're saying I'm part of this now? That I have a role to play? My voice was trembling, but I couldn't help it. The realization was still sinking in. Everything I had thought was real was a lie. This was all a game to them, a game where I was just a pawn. Michael, who had been silently observing my reaction, nodded slowly. His expression never wavered. You've been part of it all along, Cal. You just didn't know it yet. Amelia's involvement, your connection to her, was always the key. You were always going to be dragged in, whether you liked it or not. I shook my head, trying to clear the fog that had settled over my brain. No, this can't be real. I'm not part of some scheme, some conspiracy. You are now, Michael replied calmly. And whether you like it or not, you'll need to make a decision. A decision. The words echoed in my mind, growing louder with each passing second. I could feel the walls of the room closing in on me, the weight of this unholy alliance pressing down on my chest. My entire life, my marriage, my home, had been built on lies, and now I was expected to play along, to accept whatever role they had for me. My mind spun, the pieces of this puzzle falling into place far too quickly. But what choice did I have? I turned to Amelia, my heart sinking at the emptiness in her eyes. Is this really what you want? To be a part of all this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She didn't answer at first, her gaze still averted, her body tense. Finally, she spoke, her voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. I never wanted this to happen, Cal. I thought we could fix things before it got this far. But it's too late now. I've made my decision. The words hung in the air, sharp and final. There was no going back. Amelia had made her choice. She had chosen them over me. The betrayal was palpable, suffocating. Amelia, I whispered, stepping closer to her. You don't have to do this. We can leave. We can go away and make things right. We can rebuild. She shook her head slowly, almost sadly. It's not that simple, Cal. You don't understand. There's too much at stake. Too much that's been set in motion. You can't just walk away from this. I felt my legs weaken as the weight of her words hit me. This wasn't just about the cabin, about the money, or some petty deal. This was about power, influence, control. And Amelia had chosen to be part of it. Whether it was for survival, greed, or something else, I would never know. But the truth was clear now. She wasn't the woman I thought I married. Michael stepped forward then, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that sent a chill down my spine. Listen carefully, Cal, he said, his voice low but firm. This is your last chance. You can walk away now. You can pretend you never found out, and we'll leave you alone. But if you decide to stay, if you decide to keep fighting this, then you need to understand something. It won't end well for you. You'll be in this, for better or worse, and there's no way out. I didn't know what to say. The ultimatum hung in the air like a poison. There was no good choice here. Either I walked away, pretending nothing had changed, or I stayed and risked everything. My safety, my future, my sanity. For the truth, I wasn't sure I even wanted to uncover. I turned my back to them, my hands trembling as I tried to process what was happening. My entire life had just been torn apart. And Amelia, she was part of it. She was standing there, watching me fall apart, not lifting a finger to help. The person I had trusted most had betrayed me in the worst possible way. I glanced back at Michael and Jennifer, who were both waiting for my response, their eyes unreadable. And then there was Amelia, standing there in the background, a ghost of the woman I had loved. "I don't know what you want from me," I said, my voice thick with frustration and hurt. "But I'm not going to play your game. I won't be part of this." Jennifer's lips curled into a small, cold smile. "It's not about playing games, Cal. It's about survival. And you can't outrun what's already been set in motion." Michael stood silently, watching me closely. "We'll give you some time to think," he said after a long pause. "But understand this, time is running out. You can't hide forever." The room seemed to close in around me as they turned to leave, the quiet sound of their footsteps fading into the hallway. I was left standing there, staring at the empty space they had vacated, the weight of their words sinking in. The truth had been laid bare, and now I had to make a choice. Walk away and pretend nothing had changed, or stay and fight, knowing that doing so would come at a cost far higher than I had ever anticipated. Amelia was still there, standing in the corner of the room, her gaze fixed on the floor. She looked broken, defeated, as though everything had slipped through her fingers. For the first time in my life, I wasn't sure if I even knew who she was anymore. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. My world had just shattered, and I was left holding the pieces, unsure of how to put them back together. I took a deep breath, my chest aching, and turned to face the woman who had once been my everything. "Amelia," I said quietly, my voice trembling. "What have you done?" She didn't answer, and in that silence, I realized that whatever came next would be a fight. A fight for control, for the truth, and for the life I thought I had lost. And no matter what decision I made, I knew it would be the hardest thing I'd ever done, because the world I knew was gone, and I had no idea who would walk away from it unscathed. The silence in the room hung heavy between us, more suffocating than the cold night air pressing against the windows. Amelia stood there, her hands wringing nervously, avoiding my gaze. I couldn't tell if it was guilt or fear in her eyes, but it wasn't the woman I knew, the woman I had trusted, the woman I had loved. The decision had to be made, and I could feel the weight of it pressing down on me. Walk away, stay, pretend nothing had happened, or fight for the truth. But as I stood there, staring at Amelia, something shifted inside me. The anger that had been rising in my chest ebbed away. I wasn't ready to lose everything. Not just yet. I wasn't ready to give up on us. I stepped forward, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. "Amelia," I said, my eyes locking onto hers. "I don't know if we can go back to what we had, but I'm not ready to walk away. Not yet. There's too much here that's broken, but there's also too much worth fighting for." She lifted her eyes to meet mine then, and I saw something there. Hope, maybe, or relief. Her lips parted, but no words came out at first. She just stared at me, as if she was trying to reconcile the man in front of her with the man she had once known. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, Cal," she whispered, the words coming out thick with emotion. "I've been selfish, scared, but I didn't want to drag you into this. I thought I could fix it alone. I was wrong, and I don't know how to make this right, but I want to try." Her voice broke, and for the first time in a long time, I saw her vulnerability, the cracks in the armor she had built around herself. My chest tightened, and without thinking, I reached out, pulling her into an embrace. "We'll figure this out," I said softly, feeling the weight of her body against mine. "Together. No matter how long it takes, we'll fix this. We'll rebuild." She clung to me like she was afraid I'd slip away, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. But the weight of what had been between us, the lies, the betrayal, began to lift. Slowly, like a heavy fog lifting after a storm, we both began to see the possibility of something new, something real. It wasn't going to be easy, but maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back. A few moments later, we pulled apart. Amelia wiped the tears from her eyes, her face filled with a mixture of regret and determination. I'm sorry, Cal. For everything. I don't know how I let it get this far. I smiled softly, though there was still a tightness in my chest. I don't know either. But we're here now. We have the chance to change things. Let's take it. She nodded, and for the first time in weeks, I saw a flicker of hope in her eyes. Maybe this wasn't the end of our story. Maybe it was just the beginning of something new, something that we could still build, brick by brick, piece by piece. I looked over at the living room, where Michael and Jennifer were still waiting, watching us. Michael had the same cold, calculating expression, but Jennifer's gaze softened slightly. They knew something had shifted. This wasn't the same man standing in front of them anymore. And I wasn't the same man who had walked into this house just hours ago. I wasn't just a pawn in their game anymore. I was a player in my own life, and I had a say in what happened next. I turned to them, my voice firm. I'm not going to be part of whatever game you're playing, I said. But Amelia and we're going to find a way to make this right. Whatever it takes, whatever it costs, we'll figure it out together. Michael stared at me for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then, to my surprise, he stood up and walked toward the door. You've made your choice, he said, his tone colder than ever. But understand this, you can't back out of this. We're too far gone for that. I didn't flinch. We'll see about that. With a sharp nod, he and Jennifer left the house, disappearing into the night like shadows, their presence now a distant memory. The weight that had pressed so heavily on my chest finally started to lift. I turned back to Amelia, who was watching me with a mix of apprehension and relief. She reached out and took my hand, her grip tight but warm. You really mean it, don't you? She asked softly. You're not just saying it because you feel like you have to? I squeezed her hand, my voice steady. I'm not saying it out of obligation. I'm saying it because I still believe in us, Amelia. I still believe in what we can be. I'm not ready to give up. She smiled then, a smile that reached her eyes for the first time in what felt like forever. Then let's figure this out, she said, her voice stronger now. Together. And in that moment, I knew that no matter what happened next, we had something worth fighting for. Maybe we had lost our way, but we hadn't lost each other. And with that, we walked forward, one step at a time, knowing that the road ahead would be difficult, but it would be ours to walk. Together. The darkness outside seemed a little less overwhelming now. And in that quiet house, with the echoes of what had happened slowly fading, I realized that sometimes the hardest battles lead to the most beautiful victories. Maybe, just maybe, we were about to find ours.